Hello, my name is Nicholas Thompson. This is my presentation over my research paper on the Indian cultural misunderstandings and unknown racism for the Indian people. I'll be going on and off the screen to change the slides. So today I'm going to start by first talking about the idea of singing red face and make a comparison with it to blackface minstrelsy. So first I will define blackface minstrelsy. So blackface minstrelsy was, back in the day, white actors would dress up as black people by putting on some kind of makeup on their face to make them look black. A prime example would be here, Al Jolson. He wasn't during the minstrel shows, but he was really well known for it in Broadway back in the 1920s and 30s. But the problem with the blackface minstrelsy was it would create really racist stereotypes towards African Americans, because in these shows they would depict their culture and try to use it as entertainment, and they would give fake stereotypes and make fun of them and not show any true parts of their culture. Now, the reason this is comparable to singing red face is the same exact thing where people act and play and sing as Indians through and create cultural misunderstandings. A prime example of singing red face may not be actual people dressing up and acting as Indians, but as shown in the 1950s movie Peter Pan, it's a prime example of singing red face, because what happened in the movie is they depicted the Indians as red, people that were actually red. They put them in a stereotypical Plains Indian dress up. There were also many other problems. There were racial words such as squaw was used, and as you can see here, they had like a princess, which was also another stereotype at the time, and they all passed around a peace pipe, and it was just a very stereotypical view of the Indian in America. And this by no means shows what a true Native American is. And through through this singing the red face, it creates cultural confusion because it enhances the stereotypes that all Indians are, red-faced people that smoke pipes and dress up with headdresses and everything. Another thing that I missed is, there were teepees, and that influences the stereotypical type of, they're all plains and they live in teepees and move around. So I'm going to talk about racial antipathy now, and also continue on the idea of the cultural confusion, the stereotypes that continue to give a bad image that is false for the Indians. So racial antipathy is basically a strong dislike towards a race or a culture, and something that fueled that were Western movies back in the mid-1900s. I don't want to say early because they weren't early, they were in the 1930s when they started. And what happened was movies such as Stagecoach were created, and what happened, they depicted Indians as savages that would, attack, pillage, and murder just because they could. And this fueled racial antipathy because it made people not like the Indians and want to get rid of them. And the problem with this, it creates a cultural confusion because it makes them think all the Indians are savage people. Why do we want them around? It makes me not want to like them, is what in my opinion, is what it was making the Americans think. Another idea of racial antipathy is the term Indian giver. Indian giver is a very bad term because it creates the idea that if you're an Indian giver, you're somebody that you give something to someone and then you want it back. And that term has been associated with the word Indian, there's no negative part in that except the word Indian. And because of that, it creates kind of a hate towards the Indian people, even though most people wouldn't think it that way. If you took the word Indian out of it and just called them givers, it wouldn't make sense. So it creates the negative connotation towards the word Indian. And that creates racial antipathy, and once again, cultural confusion, because it makes you think poorly of the Native American and Indian people. Now I'm going to move on to the idea of the cultural misappropriation of the Indian people, and also how this can lead into the idea of playing Indian. So, cultural misappropriation is when you use another culture just to gain and benefit from their culture towards your own means. A prime example of this would be Florida State University. Florida State University is known as, Florida State, the Seminoles. And one of the main things that they do is they get the people involved because their mascot, which was a Seminole Indian, and he was very stereotypical, and it caused a lot of problems. Another thing that they did is they get their crowd involved in something called the tomahawk chop, where they would howl like an Indian and act like they were running with a tomahawk, and which would cause them to act like a warrior. And it kept the crowd entertained and into what was happening, but the problem with it is that they would create the idea of a false image of an Indian once again. And the school gains from this, but it continues to hurt the image and the culture of the Native American people in the United States. And then now, the whole idea of cultural misappropriation into playing Indian can be seen through many of the schools in the NCAA. Back in 2005, the NCAA tried to crack down on schools that were misrepresenting the Native American people in the United States, including Florida State. But the Seminoles agreed to let Florida State keep their name and everything. Other schools didn't. But the problem with some of this comes to the idea of playing Indian. These schools will ask you to come to them, such as the Florida State Seminoles, and say, "Come here, be a Seminole," and then you can be an Indian with them. And that creates problems because the people actually think they're being Indian. And one of the main issues with the schools doing this is it's caused actual people to think when they're playing at these schools as being Indian, they start to think they're actual Indian. And one of the sources that I've used has talked about how certain schools that these students apply to, especially law schools, these students will mark that they're an Indian as their culture and their race, and excuse data to make it look like there's more Indians in these law schools than there actually are. And it creates it's almost another cultural confusion. I wouldn't call it cultural confusion, but it creates cultural misunderstandings because these people aren't of true tribe membership, and it causes lots of problems towards help furthering the Indian cause of understanding their culture, and these people are just playing and acting, and it can be a very dangerous thing. Now we're going to move on to the idea of idealized sympathy. Idealized sympathy is the sympathy towards a culture that is based off of false images of that culture. So it's sympathy, but it's not sympathy towards the right idea because you're being sympathetic to something that's not true. To take into the example, there's a song by a man named Marvin Radewater, who you can see here, and the song was called The Pale-Faced Indian. And it was about his people and the struggles that they had and how he kind of lost his faith, but lost his heritage and everything. He actually had Cherokee heritage in him. Now, we move on to Don Farden. Don Farden covered his song, but Don Farden had no Indian heritage in him. So when he covered the song, he changed the name to Indian Reservation the laminate of the Cherokee Indian Reservation. In this song, he sang about the same ideas, but he changed the lyrics in a way to where it put very stereotypical ideas and imagery into the minds of the people. And that may be why this song, in my opinion, this song was more popular than that one, and that may be why. So, but that's the idea of idealized sympathy. He was trying to be sympathetic and cover this man's song, and what he did was he caused it to be more, of a false culture that he's sympathizing. So, and that's the idea of idealized sympathy. All right, and to summarize, I believe there's a lot of cultural misunderstandings and a lot of false images created through our understanding of the Indian peoples and all of what I've spoken of here. And the only way we're going to be able to fix these problems is we're going to have to acquire knowledge and get it out to the people so that hopefully these false images and false ideas can be changed and the people will truly understand what being Native American is instead of everything I had to talk about right here. Any questions? All right, well, my cameraman said no, so have a good day.